Hey guys, happy Monday. So we are going to finish Of Mice and Men today. We'll have an online discussion assignment tomorrow, and I'd like your packet turned into me by end of day tomorrow, okay? You should have been working on your packet as we've gone through, but the whole thing, including the journal questions, is going to be due tomorrow by midnight, okay? So chapter 6 starts off the exact same way the beginning of the book started. And as we remember about the chapter with crooks, if something starts the exact same way it ends the exact same way it began, it tells us something. If you forgot what that tells you, go back and rewatch the chapter 4 video, okay? But it's an important thing for you to pick up on, so be sure you do that, okay? We see Lenny comes to the pool's edge. He drinks a little bit of water, but he doesn't drink the water the way he did before. He takes a little sip this time, not just putting his whole head in, because he's not happy anymore. You know, he knows he just killed a woman. He's scared, and he ran. He knows he's in trouble, so he ran to the place where George told him to go. He remembered all of that. And he kind of starts talking to his conscience, okay? And because Lenny doesn't quite grasp the concept of a conscience, in his head it has to turn into somebody else. So at first he sees his Aunt Clara. They've been talking about her the whole book. And he talks to her. And she's mad at him. And she says, you know, George, it's all in Lenny's voice because he can't do someone else's voice. Remember, he's very, very simple. She said, you know, you didn't help George. He did good things for you, and you've made things hard for him. He always does nice things for you, and you've ruined it, which is telling us that Lenny feels really guilty. He doesn't want to ruin things for George, but he knows that he has. And he says he's going to go find a cave, and he's going to go live somewhere else because, like, this is really, he feels bad. He feels guilty, but he doesn't know how to fix it. And let's be honest, you can't unbreak someone's neck. That doesn't work. So he talks to his Aunt Clara about the things he felt bad about and about how he has so much faith in George, and George isn't going to be mean to me. He's going to be nice. He's not going to be mean. He won't leave me. George loves me. And he gets scared that George is going to leave, so he starts crying for George. And then Lenny starts talking to a rabbit, right? He starts talking to the rabbit about how George sucks, or George is great, but Lenny sucks. And then George comes out of the bush. And George says, what are you yelling about? He was like, you're not going to leave me, are you? I know you're not going to leave me. And George sits down next to him, and he says, no, I'm not. Lenny says, well, I knew that because you're not that kind of guy. And George is very quiet. And Lenny tells him, I did another bad thing. And George says, doesn't make it any difference. It's okay. And Lenny says, well, aren't you gonna give me hell? Aren't you gonna get mad at me? And he's like, oh my gosh, Lenny, you can't remember anything that you do or anything that happens, but you can remember every single word that I say. And Lenny's like, well, aren't you gonna get mad at me? And so George very half-heartedly was like, if I was alone, I could live so easy. I could get a job and not have no mess. And Lenny's like, tell me more. Because Lenny was like, just punish me. I know I did something wrong. I feel bad. Punish me. Because, like, think about it. When you're a kid and you did something really terrible and you're guilty about it and your parents know, you want a punishment, right? Like, be mad at me. The worst thing they can say is they're disappointed in you. The worst they can do is be sad. Because you're like, no, just be angry, please. Because disappointment hurts worse than anger, especially when you already feel bad. And so George gets through his little spiel, and he barely can. He stops, and George is like, come on, give me some help. And George says, no. He's, I'll leave this. It's fine. I can go away. I can find something else. And George says, no, I want you to stay with me here. And Lenny says, well, tell me like you've done before. And he says, tell you out. He said, about the other guys and us. And George starts telling him about how they're a family, how other people don't have family, but they have each other. And George says, but not us. Or Lenny says, tell about us. And he says, not us. And Lenny says, because. And George says, because I got you. And Lenny says, and I got you. We got each other. That gives a hoot and hell about us. And then they start hearing the men coming behind them. And George takes off his hat and puts it on the ground. He says, take off your hat, Lenny. The air feels fine. And Lenny removed his hat dutifully, lays on the ground in front of him, and George tells Lenny, look across the river and look at all the beautiful landscape here. I'm going to tell you about all the things we're going to have. I want you to picture it, okay? So he's looking off forward, and George starts to tell him their story they've told 100 times. And he takes Carlson's gun out of his pocket because George stole it, not Lenny. And he takes the gun, he turns off the safety and puts it behind Lenny's back on the ground. And he looks at the back of Lenny's head, right where the skull and the spine come together. Lenny says, go on. And George puts his hand up, and it's shaking really bad, so he puts his hand back down. He says, come on. Lenny's like, come on, tell me more, tell me. And George starts talking about cows and chickens and alfalfa for the rabbits and how Lenny gets to tend the rabbits. And Lenny tries to look at him, and he says, no, Lenny, look across the river. You can almost see the place. And he starts talking through all things they're going to do together, and people are going to be nice to him, and people are going to be in any more trouble, and no one's going to hurt him or steal from him. People are going to be good to Lenny forever. And Lenny says, I thought you were mad at me, George. And George says, no, Lenny, I ain't mad. I never been mad, and I ain't now. That's the thing I want you to know. And the voices get a little closer, so George raises the gun. And Lenny says, let's do it now. Let's get the place right now. And George says, sure. Right now. We've gotta. And he raises the gun, and his hand is shaking, but he steadies his hand. He points at the back of Lenny's head, and he pulls the trigger. And Lenny's body falls forward, and George just throws the gun away from him and just sits there and shakes. And when they hear the gun, the men come running, and Slim comes and like, George, where are you? And he's just sitting there. And Curly sees Lenny and is like, oh, you got him. You got him right in the back of the head. And Slim sits down next to him because Slim knows what happened. Slim's a smart man, and he gets it. And he says, sometimes you just have to. You have to do what you have to do. But Carlson says, well, how'd you do it? Didn't he have my gun? And he said, yeah, he had your gun. He said, and you got it from him, and you killed him. And he says, yeah, that's how. And Slim takes him by the elbow and's like, come on, man, let's go get a drink. And George just says, yeah, a drink. So says, you had to, George, I swear you had to, come on with me. And Slim takes George, and they go to leave. And Carlson and Curly don't understand, like, why is he so upset? Because George weighed his options. And Lenny is his best friend in this world, and Lenny is the only person that brings him joy. He has a hope and a dream with Lenny, but he also realizes that things with Lenny are escalating. And he can't control him anymore. And Lenny just killed someone who didn't deserve it, someone who was innocent, and he didn't know any better, and he didn't mean to, but Lenny is a murderer. If Curly got his hands on him, he would have shot him in the stomach, let him bleed out terribly and slowly, would have lynched him. If the law got a hold of him, he would have been put into an insane asylum and treated like an animal. And George didn't want that for his best friend, the only person in the world who he loves and cares about. George doesn't want that for him. He wants to do right by his friend. Think back about Candy and his dog. What was Candy's one big regret? That he didn't do it himself. And George knows what he has to do. He knows that Lenny doesn't have a future, and they don't have a future together. And instead of letting Lenny hurt other people or be hurt by other people, George realizes the best thing for Lenny is he's going to have to die. But he lets him die in the best way he can think of. Sitting next to a stream, looking at a beautiful valley, and talking about their big dream of their home. Because Lenny never lost his hope. George made sure of that. He had to talk it through with Lenny and tell him all the things they were going to have. And he let Lenny die happy. It's kind of a big deal. Because it would have been easier for George to not do that. Can you imagine having to make a choice like that? The only person in the world that you spend time with, that you care about, and you have to kill them. It would have been a heck of a lot easier for George not to do that, to walk away, let someone else take care of it, because that's hard. But he can guarantee Lenny dies well if he takes care of Lenny himself. And that's the end of the book. Can't say I didn't prepare you for the fact that it was going to be sad. And John Steinbeck leaves us a lot of hints about what's going to happen. He really does. He lays it out for us. There's tons and tons and tons of foreshadowing in this book. But this chapter is really short. The book itself is really short. So I want you to finish your packet. I want you to finish the journal questions and be ready for our online discussion tomorrow. If you feel so inclined, shoot me my message and tell me what you learned about the end of our book, or through the book, or how your reactions, your response, your emotions. It's a hard hitter. It is, because you like Lenny and you like George. And honestly, you learn to like Curly's wife. The only person you really don't like is Curly. And it's a sad book. George's life is going to be sad from here on out. Lenny's life is gone. Curly's wife's life is gone. What do? How do you make it different? Things to think about till our discussion tomorrow. I love you. Be good.